Yes, unfortunately, I do think Neal Stephenson lost the plot. We are talking about Quicksilver in the Baroque Cycle, and this is the edition that is 927 pages. There is a different set of editions. This is actually kind of 3 books in one. The Baroque Cycle was published in 2 different formats. There are the versions like this, where it's 3 books, and there's another format where it's 8 books. That's confusing. Anyway, this is split up into 3 books in that other format. So this one's 927 pages, but in the 3-book format, it's 1,320 pages. This was published in 2003. Now, he had written several books before that. I've read most of them. I've also read Anathem, which was published after the Baroque Cycle. And I absolutely loved Anathem. I loved Cryptonomicon. This is kind of vaguely connected with Cryptonomicon. Some of the names are similar. Cryptonomicon is set basically in late 1990s, I think. This is set in late 1600s, early 1700s, and kind of involves some of the ancestors of people from Cryptonomicon. Now, Neal Stephenson usually writes science fiction, and I guess you could call this science fiction a little bit, only in the sense that it's about science. It's about people like Newton and Leibniz. It's a very loose definition of science fiction, but that's how we can kind of classify it as science fiction. So what's it about? Well, it's a tough one to summarize, but it's basically about the beginnings of the Royal Society, which is kind of this science institution thing that had famous people like Isaac Newton in it and Stephen Hawking. And so it's about the beginning of that Royal Society, and it's through the eyes of kind of fictional characters interacting with these famous people. It's also about a whole lot of political intrigue of the time, the kind of various kings, Louis XIV and Charles II, James II, this kind of thing. And again, it's through the eyes of fictional characters interacting with these kings. Neal Stephenson's books are brimming with ideas and information. It can sometimes take a bit of time to get up to speed while reading them. I remember Anathem, the first 200 pages is just crazy because there's all this weird terminology because it's set in a kind of parallel Earth, and they have different names for things. But that actually had a very good purpose in that book. Anyway, I won't go any more into that. In the case of Quicksilver, it's that he's using terms that people would have used back in the 1600s and 1700s when this was set. So instead of calling Europe Europe, it was called Christendom. And sometimes these things are explained in the prose or as part of the dialogue, but sometimes they're not. So when I was reading the first part of the book, I was doing a heck of a lot of Googling and reading Wikipedia pages. Of course, you don't have to do that, but it's the kind of thing I enjoy. I enjoy exploring and learning about a world, so like fantasy worlds where there's good world building. It's just a bonus that in this case, it's actual history and facts that I'm learning. Unfortunately, it pains me to say it, that this was not as enjoyable as I hoped it would be. This is the very definition of a mixed bag. You grab a whole bunch of stuff, you stuff it in a bag, and you jostle it around, and you just take out things at random and talk about them. In fact, that's not enough. Let's use 10 bags, because there's so much stuff in this. There are some great scenes, and there's lots of historical detail, and it's quite funny in parts. But it's also a bit tedious, a bit crass in parts, and worst of all, it's directionless. And that's what made it feel like a chore at times. I got to the end and I was like, what was the point of all that? Hopefully books 2 and 3 will improve. The ratings on Goodreads are much higher. So yeah, I gave Anathem and Cryptonomicon 5 stars, but unfortunately I'm only giving this 3 stars. Now it does have some maps, so I always like talking about the maps, and in this case the map of Europe is quite interesting because it's the Europe at that point in time, which obviously has quite a few differences to what our current map of Europe looks like. And there's a bit of a more detailed map of the Rhine Valley. It's very useful for the third part of the book because there's kind of one main character that it follows, and you can follow where she goes on the map. So again, it's only 3 stars for this one, and hopefully the next 2 volumes will improve on that score.